Mom poisoned your soup. I laughed when my grandson told me, but then I checked the cameras and saw the worst. Matthias's message arrived like a mischievous little bird that slips through the open window of a quiet afternoon. The alert tone of the phone cut through the soft crackling of the fire in the fireplace. I was in the living room, wrapped in the warm silence of the house that was beginning to dress itself in the first shadows of the autumn evening. On the screen, my grandson's name, Matti. I smiled. At 7 years old, he already handled his mother's phone with the skill of a little spy, sending long audios full of trivial news that for me were the height of importance. I slid my finger across the screen. It wasn't an audio, but a text. Capital letters, clumsy, as if he had struggled with the keyboard. Grandmom poisoned your soup. The hoarse laugh, rough from disuse, burst from my insides. I released it into the silence of the room, bouncing off the family portraits, the dusty bookshelves, and the pendulum clock that marked 5:20. I imagined my daughter Laura in her bright kitchen, with her flower-patterned apron stained with tomato, tasting the vegetable soup she always brought me on Tuesdays, and Matthias, with his dark eyes full of childish mischief, inventing a story of evil witches in the midst of absolute normalcy. "Haha, my love," I replied, typing clumsily. "And did she add bat eyes and mosquito wings too? Tell her that with a little more oregano, it would be perfect. I love you. Big hugs." I left the phone on the arm of the chair, that green velvet chair worn by generations of restless bottoms and peaceful dreams. My laughter faded, leaving an aftertaste of nostalgia. The house suddenly seemed bigger, emptier, more silent. Since Manuel left 3 years ago, I was the one who provided the sounds, the radio with its distant voices, the television with its foreign dramas, the boiling of the kettle. But Tuesdays were different. Tuesdays smelled of homemade broth and family bustle. Laura always arrived around 6, with her plastic container still warm, Matthias hanging from her hand like a cheerful ballast, and an energy that filled every corner of this old house. They would stay for an hour, sometimes 2. Matthias would run around the hallway. Laura would update me on everything with her rapid and efficient speech, as if trying to compress a week of life into 60 minutes, and I absorbed every word, every gesture, every laugh from my grandson, like a dry sponge in a desert of routine. Today was Tuesday. I looked at the clock. Less than an hour to go. I got up with a muffled complaint from my knees, which always protested at weather changes, and approached the window. The street, cobbled and narrow, was bathed in that amber and sad light that precedes nightfall. The leaves of the plane trees fell in slow spirals, painting the asphalt gold. A cat crossed leisurely. Everything in order, everything in its place, everything quiet. But Matthias's phrase, absurd as it was, began to gravitate in my mind with a strange weight. Mom poisoned your soup. It wasn't just a prank, it was specific, concrete. Why the soup? Why poison? Where would a 7-year-old child get such an idea, so macabre, so targeted? A slight shiver, almost imperceptible, ran down my back. I rubbed my arms, encased in the thick wool sweater I always wore at home. It was silly. Of course it was. Laura was Laura. My daughter, the girl who collected ladybugs in jam jars, the teenager who cried inconsolably at the sappiest movies, the woman who had raised a son practically alone after that idiot of her husband abandoned them for a research scholarship on another continent. Laura, whose greatest flaw was a fierce, sometimes suffocating overprotectiveness toward Matthias and toward me. Laura, who called me 3 times a day to make sure I had taken my blood pressure medication. Poison me? It was so ridiculous I almost laughed again. But the laugh didn't come. My eyes, wandering aimlessly around the room, settled on the small black device, the size of a matchbox, that hung with a magnet from the window frame. The camera. Laura had installed it a few months ago, after the neighbor next door was robbed during her nap. Just in case, Mom, so I can peek at you from my phone and see that you're okay. It seemed like an exaggeration to me, an invasion of my already diminished privacy, but I agreed for her peace of mind. I hardly ever remembered it was there. It recorded in a loop, storing the last 72 hours, and overwrote itself automatically. Mom poisoned your soup. The phrase resonated again, now with a sinister echo. No, I wasn't going to be that crazy old woman who sees ghosts where there are none. I was going to set the table for tea, take out the ginger cookies that Matthias liked, wait for my family like every week. But my feet didn't obey me. They remained planted on the Persian rug, worn and full of memories. My hands, on their own, sought the iPad that I always had charging on the center table, with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy, as if they belonged to another body. I turned it on. The screen lit up, projecting a faint blue glow on my face. I looked for the app with the security company logo. My thumb hesitated for a millisecond over the icon. This was madness, an unforgivable lack of trust. What would Laura say if she found out? She would feel devastated, betrayed. It's for Matthias. I lied to myself. Maybe he saw some movie and is confused. I have to check so I can laugh with Laura later. I touched the icon. The app opened, asking for the password. Laura's Matthias's name and his birth year. My heart gave a strange leap as I entered it. I felt like an intruder in my own life. The interface was simple. A list of devices, living room camera, below a timeline with a moving thumbnail. There I was, minutes before getting up from the chair. My breathing began to tighten in my chest, an invisible fist that gently squeezed my lungs. There was nothing to see. I was going to turn it off. But then, my gaze fell on the date. Today was Tuesday. Laura came on Tuesdays around 6. But what about Mondays? On Monday afternoons, Laura always came alone. After dropping Matthias off at English class, she said it was our girls' day. We had coffee, talked, and invariably, she left me the soup prepared for Tuesday. That way you just have to heat it up, Mom. And I save you work, she would say. Yesterday was Monday. My fingers, now cold and trembling, slid the playback bar back on the timeline. I searched around 5 in the afternoon the day before. The thumbnail showed the empty living room. I must have been in the kitchen or upstairs, reading. I found the moment. The living room door opened and Laura appeared. She wore her usual beige coat and a shopping bag. I smiled, seeing her. She was my girl, my Laura. The tension began to dissipate. I was being a paranoid old woman. I was going to close the app and go greet them with a smile of shame for having doubted even for a second. But I didn't close it. I watched her leave the bag on the table and head to the kitchen. The living room camera didn't cover that room, but it had an angle that captured the half-open door and a piece of the countertop. I observed her moving with her usual efficiency. She took out a large pot, put it on the stove. From the bag she extracted the vegetables, carrots, celery, leek. She cut them with quick and sure movements, the knife hitting the wooden board with a familiar and reassuring rhythm. I could almost smell the aroma of fresh vegetables. I saw myself entering the frame, laughing, saying something. She responded with a wide, affectionate smile. I offered to help and she, with a loving but firm gesture, shooed me away from the space. You rest, Mom. I'll take care of it. Sit down, your back will hurt later. It was our ritual. It was normal. Everything was normal. I forced myself to breathe deeply. What nonsense. I was going to stop this now. But then, on the screen, something happened. Laura stood still. She left the knife on the counter. Her back was toward the camera, but her posture had changed. The usual ease had disappeared. She had become rigid, alert. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to something. I, from the living room, must have said I was going to the bathroom or something, because I moved away from the frame. She was left alone in the kitchen. And then, very slowly, deliberately, she approached the entrance to the living room and looked toward where I had been. She made sure I was out of sight. The fist in my chest squeezed tighter. The blood seemed to roar inside my ears, drowning out the ticking of the clock, the crackling of the fire. I saw how her figure, sharp on the iPad screen, turned toward the shopping bag. She didn't take out more vegetables. She put her hand deep inside, in that space where small packages are kept, and extracted something. It wasn't a broth packet. It wasn't a bag of herbs. It was a small opaque plastic bottle, white, without any label, one of those bought at pharmacies or online to store samples. She held it in her palm for an instant that seemed eternal to me. I saw her looking at it. It wasn't the look of someone finding a forgotten ingredient. It was a look concentrated, intense, almost fierce. Then again that feline movement, quick and furtive. She looked toward the living room door. She made sure she was still alone. She opened the bottle. She poured part of its contents onto her fingertips. A white powder, fine, like rice flour or starch. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. With my heart pounding in my temples, with my mouth dry as cotton, I watched helpless as my daughter, my Laura, brought her hand close to the steaming pot where my soup was cooking, and with a gesture that wasn't of a cook but of something else, something obscene and terrible, she let that white powder fall into the broth. She stirred with the wooden spoon, slowly, methodically, making sure it dissolved completely. Then she washed her hands under the faucet, with exaggerated care, drying each finger with the cloth. She put the bottle back in the depths of the bag, and immediately, her posture changed completely. Her shoulders relaxed. Her back regained its familiar curve. She wiped a few drops of sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and smiled as if nothing had happened, as if she had just added a little salt or pepper. At that moment, I appeared again in the frame, with a book in my hand, saying something. Laura turned toward me, and her face was the same as always, warm, loving, a little tired. She said something to me and pointed to the pot. I nodded, smiled, and went back toward the living room. She finished cooking. She started cleaning. Everything normal. Everything as always. But nothing would ever be normal again. Ever. The iPad slipped from my hands and fell onto my lap. I didn't feel the impact. I felt nothing. It was as if I had been emptied from the inside, having all my organs, all my bones, all my memories extracted and replaced with molten lead and dry ice. I couldn't breathe. The world had blurred. The colors had faded. Sound had died. Only the image existed, burned into my retinas, of my daughter's hand pouring that white, ghostly, anonymous powder into my food. Mom poisoned your soup. Matthias's laughter wasn't a prank. It was a warning, a cry for help thrown with the atrocious innocence of a child who doesn't quite understand the monstrosity he's witnessing. How many times would he have seen it? How many times would he have been a silent witness to that poisoned ritual in his own kitchen? A moan, hoarse and animal, tore through my throat. I bent over my knees, hugging my stomach, as if I could physically expel the horror, the betrayal, the absolute pain that consumed me. The tears didn't come. It was pain beyond tears, an existential cataclysm. Why? 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 The word bounced in my skull, hitting mercilessly. Was it money? I didn't have much, just this old house and a modest pension. Was it a mental illness, some kind of psychosis that had escaped me? Laura had always been intense, controlling, but this was evil. It was premeditation. It was the hidden bottle, the furtive look, the lie sustained for months, maybe years. I thought about all the times I had felt more tired than normal after eating, about the mild dizziness I attributed to my blood pressure medication, about the growing weakness I blamed on age, loneliness. The pain of losing Manuel, was all that natural, or was it the slow, inexorable effect of that white powder my daughter administered to me with an angel's smile? Panic seized me then, a cold and rational panic. The container. It was in the fridge. The poisoned soup was in my fridge, waiting for me to heat it for dinner. I got up staggering, pushing myself against the chair, as if the floor were moving. I ran toward the kitchen, my steps clumsy on the cold tiles. I opened the fridge door with such force that the jars inside rattled. There it was, the transparent plastic container, filled with that yellowish and innocent broth that hid death. I took it. I held it in my hands. It weighed nothing, and weighed the whole world. My instinct was to throw it down the sink, break it, make it disappear. But no, it was the evidence, the only tangible proof of the nightmare. Suddenly, a sound chilled my blood, even more than the discovery. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, cheerful, followed by the tinkle of the key in the front door lock. "Grandma, we're here," sang Matthias's high and sweet voice from the hallway. My heart stopped. The world contracted until it was reduced to the kitchen door, the hallway leading to the living room, the poisoned container I held in my hands. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, quick and small ones from Matthias, sure and familiar ones from Laura. "Mom? Are you in the kitchen?" called my daughter's voice. Her voice, the voice that had sung lullabies, that had given advice, that had said "I love you" 1,000 times. The voice that I now knew was capable of lying with lethal sweetness. "I brought the soup, but just in case you wanted to heat yesterday's," she laughed. A clear, crystalline laugh, full of a normalcy that now seemed obscene to me. They were already in the living room. I was in the kitchen, paralyzed with the evidence of the crime in my hands and my face distorted by a terror I couldn't hide. There was no time to hide the container. There was no time to compose an expression. There was no time to understand, to assimilate, to plan. Laura's silhouette appeared in the kitchen doorframe. She was holding Matthias by the hand. Her smile was wide, warm. Her eyes shone with the usual affection, but seeing me, seeing my frozen posture, the container in my hand, and surely the cadaverous pallor of my face, her smile cracked slightly. "Mom? What's wrong? Are you feeling all right?" she asked, with a note of genuine concern in her voice, a concern I no longer knew if it was real or the performance of a sociopath. Her eyes dropped to the container I pressed against my chest. And there, for a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, I saw how something darkened in her gaze. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was a quick, fleeting flash of alarm, of calculation. And then, immediately, it was covered again with the layer of tenderness and concern. But I had already seen it. I had seen the abyss. Matthias, unaware of the glacial tension that filled the room, let go of his mother's hand and ran toward me. "Grandma, I warned you," he whispered, hugging my legs and looking at me with his enormous eyes, full of a secret we now shared, and that weighed too much for his small shoulders. Laura didn't move. She remained on the threshold, watching me. Her smile was now a little tense, a little forced. Her eyes so similar to mine, I could no longer read. They were a deep and treacherous ocean. "Warn you of what, sweetheart?" asked Laura, her voice soft as silk, but with a steel edge barely perceptible beneath the surface. Her eyes didn't leave mine, defying me, challenging me to speak, to accuse her, to shatter the idyllic farce of our family in the usual kitchen, with the aroma of poisoned soup between us. The silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was a living entity, heavy and oppressive, that filled the kitchen, squeezing the three of us in its invisible fist. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer blows. The distant hum of a car on the street was a roar. My own blood was an enraged tide thundering in my ears. Laura's eyes, fixed on mine, didn't blink. That fraction of a second in which I had seen the flash of alarm and calculation had passed, erased by a layer of concern, so well acted that had I not had the visceral certainty of what I had seen on the camera, I would have believed it. Her smile was tense, yes, but could pass for that of a daughter who sees her elderly mother pale and trembling. "Warn you of what, sweetheart?" she repeated, her voice a thread of silk wrapped around my throat. Matthias, clinging to my legs, looked up at me. His eyes, enormous and dark, pleaded. He didn't understand the complexity of the horror, but he understood the danger. He had broken an unwritten rule by telling me the secret, and now felt the weight of the transgression. My mouth was dry, pasty, my tongue a piece of immobile cloth. The container with the soup was a block of ice against my chest, an explosive artifact that could detonate our reality at any second. What could I say? What should be said at such a moment? The options shot through my mind like shrapnel from a grenade. Option 1. Confrontation. "You're a monster. I saw the camera. I know what you did." Imagine it, screaming, crying, Matthias terrified. Police, scandal, and then evidence. A bottle without a label. A video that could be interpreted in 1,000 ways. It was spirulina, Mom. A supplement. I told you last week. Don't you remember? And me, the elderly mother, confused, forgetful, the one who gets lost in her thoughts, the one who no longer distinguishes reality. She would laugh with pity, hug me, and take me straight to a nursing home, with the diagnosis of incipient senile dementia with paranoid episodes. And the soup, week after week, would continue to arrive. Option 2. Flight. Push her, grab Matthias, run out to the street screaming, "Help!" To whom? To the neighbors, to the police. Again, her word against mine, her perfect sanity against my vulnerable old age. And Matthias, in the middle of that chaos, destroyed. Option 3. The lie. The only viable one, the most heartbreaking. Play the role she expected. Immerse myself in the fiction she had created for us. I took air. The sound of my inhalation, trembling and hoarse, broke the spell of silence. "Nothing, sweetheart? Nothing?" I managed to stammer, and my voice sounded foreign, like that of a very old and very tired woman. I forced a smile that must have been a grotesque grimace. "Matthias told me that you had brought me some chocolate cookies you made together. Is that the secret, my love?" I caressed my grandson's hair, my fingers trembling like leaves. The lie was so enormous, so obvious, that the world should have opened beneath my feet. But Matthias, my little innocent accomplice, nodded fervently, clinging to the lifeline I threw him. "Yes, they're shaped like dinosaurs," he exclaimed, with a relief so palpable, it broke my soul in two. Laura's eyes softened, not completely. A shadow of suspicion, a very fine line of tension around her lips, remained there. She looked at me, then looked at the container I still pressed against my chest like a shield. "Oh, Mom, are you going to heat yesterday's?" she said, finally advancing toward the kitchen. Her movement was fluid, natural. She approached the fridge and opened the door. "Look, I brought you a new one. I made this one today. It's fresher. Save that one for tomorrow." She left her bag on the counter and took out another identical container, filled with the same yellowish and treacherous broth. She placed it on the empty shelf that mine had left. A domestic, everyday gesture. A gesture of a caring daughter. And the most terrifying I had witnessed in my life. "Give me that. I'll store it myself," she said, extending her hand toward the container I held. "No, It's the evidence. Don't give it to her. But I couldn't refuse. Any resistance would be a red flag, with a slowness I hoped would seem like weakness, and not the extreme reluctance it was. I extended my arm and gave it to her. Our fingers didn't touch. She took it from one side, I from the other. She placed it in the fridge, next to the new one, 2 containers of death in a row, in the cold glow of the interior light. "Let's go to the living room. You look pale here," she said, putting an arm around my shoulders. Her touch electrified me with horror. It was the touch of a murderer. It was the touch of my daughter. My body went rigid, but she interpreted it as frailty. "See, you're tired. Matthias, help me with Grandma." Matthias took my hand with his, small and warm. They guided me like an invalid toward the living room, toward the green velvet chair. I sat down, sinking into the cushion, as if seeking refuge. Laura knelt in front of me, her hands on mine. Her eyes searched mine. "Are you sure you're okay, Mom? Did you take your medication today?" The question was a twisted knife. My medication? The one she dispensed to me in weekly pill organizers that she prepared carefully. Was that also poisoned? Was it all a slow and methodical system of annihilation? Yes, I took it. I lied. I didn't remember if I had. "Well, now a little hot soup will do you good," she said, getting up with that practical energy that had always characterized her. "I'm going to heat the new one. Matthias, get the cookies for Grandma." "Yes," the boy shouted, and ran toward his mother's bag, rummaging inside. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, watching the scene from outside my body. Laura in the kitchen, heating the new soup, the one she had brought today. Would it also contain the white powder? Or only Monday's, the one she cooked here, away from indiscreet eyes, was adulterated? Matthias returned triumphant, with a plastic box full of dinosaur-shaped cookies, clumsily decorated with colored sugar. "Look, Grandma, a T-Rex." I took a cookie. It tasted like ash. I swallowed with difficulty. "Are they good, Grandma?" he asked, anxiously. "Delicious, sweetheart," I whispered, and the caress I gave him on the cheek was the only true thing in the middle of that monumental theater of lies. Laura returned with a tray. A steaming bowl of soup, toasted bread, a glass of water. She placed it on the small table in front of me. The aroma of vegetables, which had always evoked comfort and care, now made me nauseous. "Eat, Mom. It will give you strength." She sat on the sofa, facing me, and took Matthias on her knees. Both looked at me, expectant. She with her serene smile of a dedicated daughter. He with the anxiety of someone who knows something very big and very bad is happening, but doesn't understand what. I had the tray in front of me. The steam from the soup rose, carrying the smell of leek and celery, and something else, something indefinable and bitter that only I could perceive. My stomach twisted. "I'm not very hungry, Loretta," I said, using the diminutive of her childhood, a last and desperate appeal to the girl she was. "Just a little," she insisted, and her voice was sweet, but her eyes were non-negotiable. They were an order. "You have to eat well. I don't want you to get sick." The irony was, as poisonous as the contents of the bowl. She gently pushed toward me. I took the spoon. The metal shone under the lamplight. I lifted it. I dipped it into the yellow broth. A piece of carrot, one of potato, innocent, treacherous. All my senses sharpened to a painful point. I saw every pore of Laura's skin, every eyelash of Matthias. I heard every breath. The world had been reduced to this spoon, to this bowl, to this choice. If I didn't eat, I would confirm her suspicions. I would show her that I knew, that I had seen, that I distrusted, and that would take me to unknown and very dangerous terrain. If I ate, I was accepting the poison. I was participating in my own slow execution. It was only a few milligrams. It wouldn't kill me today, but each spoonful was a surrender, a betrayal of myself. Come on, Grandma. It's good, said Matthias, encouraging me. His words decided me. He was here, witnessing everything. If I refused, the conflict would explode in front of him. I couldn't do that to him. I had to protect him, even from his own mother, even if that meant poisoning myself a little more. I brought the spoon to my lips. The warmth of the broth fogged my face. I closed my eyes. It didn't taste strange. It tasted like soup, like Laura's soup, like the winters of my childhood, like colds cured with care, like the life I thought I had. I swallowed. The hot mouthful descended down my throat and lodged in my stomach like an ember. I felt no burning, no metallic taste, nothing out of the ordinary, just the weight of complicity and the bitter taste of betrayal. See? It's doing you good. You have better color, said Laura, and her smile widened. It was the smile of satisfaction, the smile of the serpent that sees how its prey accepts fate. I forced another smile, a grimace of gratitude. Yes, it is. It's delicious, daughter. Thank you. She nodded, satisfied. The moment of danger had passed. For her, I had passed the test. I had behaved like the docile and trusting mother she needed me to be. The rest of the visit passed in a surreal fog. We talked about banal things. Laura's work, Matthias's school, how cold it was getting. I responded with monosyllables, with tense smiles, with nods. Every minute was torture. Every laugh from Laura was a nail in my coffin. Every caress to Matthias seemed like contamination. Finally, Laura looked at the clock. Well, Mother, we have to go. Matthias has to bathe, and tomorrow is school. I got up, stiffer than ever. I accompanied them to the door. The usual ritual. The hugs, the kisses. Laura hugged me. Her perfume, the same as always, enveloped me. It was the aroma of my daughter, and in that hug, I felt how she whispered in my ear, with a voice so low that only I could hear it, so sweet it chilled the blood. Take care of yourself, Mom. Rest, and don't forget, finish the soup. It will do you good. She let me go, and looked into my eyes, and there in the twilight of the hallway, I saw the naked truth. There was no concern. There was no affection. There was a challenge, a reminder, a veiled threat. Yes, daughter. Don't worry about me, I replied, with the most neutral voice I could manage. Matthias hugged my legs tightly. I love you, Grandma, he murmured, and his voice trembled slightly. I love you too, my life. More than anything in this world, I told him, and it was the only absolute truth I had left. I watched them leave down the hallway, down the stairs. Laura didn't turn her head. Matthias did once, and I saw his lost, frightened look. I closed the door. I threw the bolt. I leaned against the cold wood, and then, finally, my body responded. A violent, uncontrollable tremor shook me from head to toe. The tears held back for an eternity burst forth in torrents, silent, burning. I slid down the door to the floor, hugging my knees, drowning the sobs in the silence of the house that was no longer my home, but my prison. I had saved myself today. I had avoided confrontation. I had protected Matthias for now, but I had tasted the poison. I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. I stayed there, on the cold floor of the hallway, crying for my daughter, for my grandson, for myself, crying for the life I had had, and now knew was a carefully constructed fiction. The tray with the soup, half full, remained in the living room. The days that followed became a nightmare of forced normalcy. Every morning, upon waking, a second of blessed ignorance preceded the avalanche of memories that hit me with the force of a hammer blow. Then, the fear, a cold and constant fear that coiled in my guts and stayed there, throbbing. I lived in a state of extreme hypervigilance. Every call from Laura was an acting exercise, every conversation a minefield. My voice, on the phone, had acquired an artificially cheerful tone, a little flat, which I hoped she would interpret as the ailments of age, and not as the terror of a cornered prey. I had hidden the Monday soup container. I had emptied it into a plastic bag, sealed with 3 knots, and hidden at the bottom of the freezer, behind a pile of old ice cream and ice cubes. It was my macabre talisman, my only proof. But what if I died before I could use it? What if she found it? I never touched the soup she brought me again. I invented excuses, that I wasn't hungry, that my stomach was upset, that I preferred tea. Laura insisted, with that patience of a sadist, that I now recognized in each of her gestures. Her concern was a golden cage. "You have to eat, Mom. You're getting skin and bones." And it was true. Fear had taken away my appetite. Sleep, peace. I was consuming myself from the inside, and she watched with that clinical, satisfied gaze, like a scientist seeing his experiment prosper. Matthias was my only lighthouse. His gaze, increasingly somber and aware, told me that he too was trapped in this web of lies. When we were alone, he squeezed my hand tightly. We said nothing. It wasn't necessary. He knew that I knew, and that shared knowledge was both a comfort and an unbearable burden. I investigated in silence. With trembling fingers, I searched on the internet for slow poisoning, symptoms of heavy metal intoxication, undetectable toxic plants. Each result was a door to horror. Fatigue, confusion, memory loss, gradual organ failure. It matched my slow decline of recent months. I had attributed it all to pain, to old age. She had planned it perfectly. One afternoon, Laura arrived alone. It wasn't a visiting day. She carried a pharmacy bag. "Hello, Mom. I've come to give you the flu vaccine. With how cold it's getting, we can't take risks." My heart froze. It wasn't a pre-filled syringe. It was a small vial, and a separate syringe. Was the needle already loaded with something else? Was she going to mix something in the vial in front of me? "No, it's not necessary, Loretta. I'll get it with the doctor," I stammered, instinctively backing away. She smiled. A wide and cold smile. "Nonsense. I'm already here. It's just a little prick. You won't even notice it. Sit in the chair, Mom. Come on." I obeyed her. I couldn't fight. Not physically. My hands were sweating. Panic clouded my vision. She was going to inject me with God knows what. I was going to die right here, in my chair, and everyone would attribute it to anaphylactic shock, to a terrible accident. She prepared the syringe with expert movements. The clear liquid inside the vial could be the vaccine, or it could be anything else. She took out the needle, bright and sharp, and a cotton ball with alcohol. "Come on, Mommy. Don't look." I closed my eyes. I felt the cold of the alcohol on my arm, the sharp prick, a brief pain, insignificant compared to what was tearing my soul apart. There. Everything went well. I opened my eyes. She was smiling, disposing of the syringe in a special container she had brought. She had left no trace. She was perfect. She sat in front of me, watching me, waiting. For what? For me to collapse? For me to start convulsing? The minutes passed. I felt nothing more than the frantic beating of my heart. She frowned slightly, as if a result wasn't being fulfilled. "Well, I'm leaving now. Rest, Mom. And really, try to eat something more." Her voice sounded slightly irritated, disappointed. She left. I remained trembling in the chair, wondering if the poison was slow acting, or if it really had been just a vaccine. I could no longer distinguish paranoia from survival. Everything was real, and everything was possible. That night, I hit rock bottom, sitting in the darkness of the living room, with only the moonlight filtering through the window. I knew I couldn't continue like this. This wasn't living, it was a slow countdown. I was going to die, go crazy, or do something desperate, and Matthias would be at her mercy. I had to act, but how? I couldn't trust the police. Without irrefutable proof, I was just a confused old woman. I needed a confession. I needed her to give herself away. A plan began to form in my mind. Terrible and risky. A trap. I would use my own body as bait. The next day I called Laura. I acted with all the strength I had left. "Lorita, daughter, can you come? I'm not feeling well. I've vomited, and I'm very weak." I coughed, weakly. "I ate the soup, like you told me, but I think it disagreed with me." From the other side of the line, a loaded silence. Then her voice, serene, but with a thread of expectation. "Of course, Mom. I'm coming right now. Have you taken anything?" "No. I just want you to be here." I hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had thrown the dice. Now I could only wait. She arrived in less than 20 minutes. She entered the house like a breeze of efficiency and concern. She carried her medical bag, that cloth case where she kept thermometers, Band-Aids, and God knows what else. "Mom? Where are you?" "Here, in the bedroom," I replied with a broken voice. I had gotten into bed. I had messed up my hair. I had made myself pale with powder. I wanted to look fragile, vulnerable, a perfect victim. She entered the room. Her silhouette was outlined in the doorframe. She observed me. Her gaze was scrutinizing, analytical, looking for signs. "What happened, Mom? Tell me." "I don't know." After eating, I started getting chills, and then nausea. I moaned, bringing my hand to my forehead. It must be a virus. She approached the bed. She sat on the edge. Her weight sank the mattress. She smelled of her perfume and cleanliness, of death disguised as life. "Did you eat all the soup?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but the question was a hook. "Almost all of it," I whispered. "I wanted to listen to you." She put her cold hand on my forehead. "You don't have a fever." Her tone was slightly disappointed. "But everything hurts." And my head, as if I were poisoned, I let the word drop, like a grenade without a safety pin. The atmosphere in the room changed. It became charged with electricity. She slowly withdrew her hand. She said nothing. She looked at me, and in her eyes, finally, the mask cracked. Not completely, but enough. Patience ran out. The farce became heavy. "Poisoned, Mom," she said. And her voice was now different, flatter, colder. "By whom?" "By me." I looked at her hands. I didn't know what to say. Fear gripped my throat. She smiled, a small smile, sad and cruel at the same time. "You were always very dramatic, since you were little. I remember when your wisdom tooth hurt, you swore your jaw was going to fall off." She got up and went to the window, looking toward the dark garden. "Raising you was exhausting, you know. Always needing attention, always with your fears, your ailments. Dad spoiled you in everything. I had to be the strong one, the sensible one." Her voice had lost all sweetness. It was the sound of an ancient deep resentment, carefully stored and now finally released. And then, "Manuel," she pronounced his name like a curse. "He did understand you, didn't he? He did play your games, both so poetic, so sensitive, so weak." She turned toward me. Her eyes shone with a strange light. "I was left taking care of both of you, him when he got sick, you when you collapsed. And what was left for me, huh?" "Laura." I tried to sit up, but she stopped me with a gesture of her hand. "Quiet. Now it's my turn to talk." Her voice was an edge. "I took care of you. I protected you. And when he finally left, When it was finally my turn to live, do you know what you did? You started dying too, slowly, leaving me tied up again, to this house, to your sadness, to your eternal mourning. She walked back toward the bed. She was no longer my daughter. She was a stranger, a woman with eyes injected with silent and bitter rage. I couldn't allow it, not again. I had sacrificed too much. She stopped, next to my nightstand, next to the glass of water. From her bag, she took out the small white opaque bottle without a label, the same one I had seen on the camera. She held it between her fingers. My heart stopped. At first they were just vitamins, iron, so you would get stronger, so you would stop complaining. She shook it gently. The invisible powder whispered inside. But then I started wondering, what if instead of helping you live, I help you go, softly, without pain, so you can rest once and for all, and so I can rest too. The confession, said with that monstrous tranquility, left me breathless. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. Why, Laura? I managed to sob. I'm your mother. That's why, she screamed. And for the first time, she lost her temper, her face contorted in a grimace of pain and hatred. Because you're my mother, and it was never enough for you. Never. Always him. Always Manuel, or Matthias, never me. The strong daughter, the one who needs nothing. Well, I don't need you anymore, and I don't love you anymore. Tears ran down her face now, but they weren't of repentance. They were of liberation, of poison purged after years. Matthias, I moaned. He knows. She wiped the tears with the back of her hand. She regained composure with visible effort. The ice mask returned to its place. Matthias is a child. He has a vivid imagination, and a very sick grandmother who tells him stories. She came closer. The bottle was now centimeters from my face. And he's going to get over it, like I've gotten over everything. He's going to be strong, like me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Terror had me paralyzed. You're not going to suffer, Mom. I promise. You're just going to sleep. And tomorrow I'll find your peaceful body, and everyone will give me their condolences for how much I did for you. Her voice was hypnotic, deadly, and finally, I'll be free. She lifted the bottle. Her intention was clear. She was going to empty it into the glass of water. She was going to finish it. Today, at that instant, a sound, a small knock at the door. We both remained motionless. The bedroom door, which Laura had closed but hadn't bolted, opened slowly. And there was Matthias, in pajamas, with eyes like saucers, full of a terror that wasn't childlike. In his hand, he held my phone tightly. The screen was lit. "Mom," said his little voice, trembling. "Stop." Laura turned around, surprised. Her expression was one of disbelief and fury. "Matthias, what are you doing here? I told you to stay in the car." I came down. The door was open, he said, without taking his eyes off her. I called Grandma, and she didn't answer. And then, from the phone, a voice emerged. A grave, familiar voice that broke all three of our hearts. "Laura, are you there? What's happening?" It was Carlos's voice, her ex-husband, Matthias's father, the man who was on the other side of the world. Matthias, my little, brave, wonderful grandson, had dialed his father's number and kept the line open. He was listening to us, everything. Laura's face completely decomposed. Horror, panic, rage succeeded each other in a grotesque mask. There was no way out now. The farce had ended. Her sin was exposed, not just to me, to her son, and to the man she had once loved.
"Hung that up!"
she screamed, lunging toward Matthias. But I reacted with a strength I didn't know I had. I got up from the bed and interposed myself between them. The needle she had given me, the slow poison, the weakness, all vanished before the primal instinct to protect my grandson. "Don't touch him," I said, and my voice sounded firm, ancient, full of an authority I hadn't used since she was a girl. She stopped short, shocked by my tone, by my posture. We looked at each other, mother and daughter, victim and executioner, and in her eyes, for an instant, I saw not the monster, but the wounded, lost girl who had chosen the darkest path to heal her pain. The phone remained in Matias's hand. Carlos's voice, agitated, asked what was happening. Laura looked at the bottle in her hand. She looked at her terrified son. She looked at me, standing, defiant, for the first time in years. And then something broke inside her. A deep, heartbreaking moan came from her throat. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to her knees on the floor. The opaque bottle rolled across the carpet, innocuous and terrible. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. They weren't the sobs from before, of rage or frustration. They were those of a painful, horrible, cathartic surrender. The sound of a soul seeing itself in the most horrible mirror and breaking. I stood there, trembling, with Matias clinging to my legs, watching my daughter broken on the floor. The sound of her pain filled the room, mixing with Carlos's voice, coming from the phone, asking, begging someone to explain what the hell was happening. There was no victory. There was no relief. There was only immense pain, an ocean of loss, and a truth too heavy to carry. The last spoon hadn't been of soup. It had been of reality, and its taste was more bitter than any poison. The sound of Laura's sobs was a wounded animal, a deep moan that emerged from a place so dark it seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. She curled up on herself on the bedroom floor, her hands clutched to her head as if trying to prevent it from splitting in two. She was no longer the architect of my end, the cold and calculating woman. She was just a terrified girl, lost in the labyrinth of her own monster. Matias, from behind my legs, watched his mother with eyes in which innocence had been broken forever. His small body trembled against mine. The phone, now silent, hung from his hand like a dead weight. Carlos, on the other side of the world, had been witness to the collapse, the screams, the veiled but undeniable confession. He didn't know the details, but he knew enough. His voice, full of growing panic, had promised to call local police before the line was cut. "Grandma," whispered Matias, his voice a thread of cotton. "It's okay, my love. It's over." I lied, stroking his hair. Nothing would ever be okay again. The minutes dragged on. The sound of Laura's crying was the only thing filling the house, an echo of the nightmare we had plunged into. I didn't move. I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't touch her. Fear and betrayal were a physical barrier between us. I could only wait, protecting Matias, hoping that someone, something, would come to put an end to this. Finally, car headlights swept across the window, painting anxious streaks of light on the walls. A door slammed shut. Firm and quick steps approached through the garden. The doorbell rang, strident, an intrusion from the outside world into our bubble of horror. "Stay here," I told Matias, and advanced with leaden legs toward the door. Upon opening it, I found two police officers, a man and a woman, with serious and professional faces. Behind them, in the shadow, I saw the anguished figure of my neighbor, Mrs. Ortiz, who must have seen the patrol car's arrival and become alarmed. "Good evening, ma'am. We received a concerning call from one Carlos Martinez from abroad regarding this address. Is everything all right?" Before I could answer, a heartbreaking scream arose from inside the house. "No, don't take my son away." Laura had burst into the hallway, her face swollen from tears, her hair disheveled. Her gaze was wild, desperate. She lunged toward Matias, who had peeked out behind me, but the female officer interposed herself with calm firmness. "Ma'am, calm down. We need to understand what's happening." Chaos erupted then. Laura was screaming, incoherent, accusing me of wanting to steal her son, of being confused, of not understanding. I, with a calmness that terrified me, pointed toward the room. "There, on the floor. There's a bottle. I think it contains what she's been using to poison me." The word poison sounded surreal in the night air of the hallway. The police officers looked at each other, the seriousness of their expressions deepening. The male officer headed to the room, while his partner tried to calm Laura, who was now crying with hysterical desperation. Matthias clung to my hand. His small pulse was the flutter of a frightened little bird. "Are they going to take Mom away, Grandma?" I didn't know what to answer. I squeezed his hand. The officer returned with the white bottle held with a handkerchief, avoiding contaminating it. His face was impassive, but his eyes said everything. "Ma'am, we're going to have to request backup and a medical unit for all of you. This is a very serious matter." The arrival of the ambulance and another patrol car turned our quiet street into a circus of blue and red lights, reflecting in the windows of neighboring houses, neighbors peering out, whispering. The whole world was finding out. Laura was led to the patrol car. There was no struggle. By then, all the fight had gone out of her. She walked with her head down, shoulders sunken, like an empty puppet. Before getting in, she turned and looked at me. And in her eyes for an instant, I didn't see evil, or hatred, or rage. I saw pain so absolute, so devastating, that it left me breathless. It was the pain of someone who has looked into the abyss and seen the monster that dwells in it. Then she lowered her head and let herself be taken away. Matthias and I were taken by ambulance to the hospital for checkups. They did blood tests on him. They stuck me with the agony of knowing that each needle, each sample, was confirmation of a betrayal that had lasted months. The hours blended into a fog of police questions, compassionate looks from nurses, and the overwhelming silence between Matthias and me. We were in a private waiting room, wrapped in thermal blankets that couldn't warm the cold that came from within. Carlos called the doctor, who was treating me on his phone. His voice was a knot of emotions: disbelief, horror, concern. He was flying back on the first available flight. Matthias spoke with him, with a tired little voice that broke the soul. "Yes, Dad. I'm with Grandma. Mom is very sad." At dawn, the preliminary results of my tests showed abnormal levels of a metallic compound, a heavy metal with cumulative and toxic effects. The confirmation, the scientific proof that corroborated the video, the confession, and the bottle. It wasn't madness, it was real. I was discharged, but there was nowhere to go that wasn't impregnated with the memory of what had happened. A social worker took care of us. Carlos had authorized me to stay with Matthias in a hotel until his arrival. We couldn't return to the house, to my house. Now it was the crime scene. The hotel room was anonymous, impersonal. It smelled clean and of disinfectant. Matthias fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the trauma, curled up in the big bed. I remained sitting in a chair, watching the city wake up through the window. The world kept turning. Cars circulated. Life continued, and I felt like a ghost, suspended between before and after. Around noon, they called the room. It was the police officer who had been in charge the night before. Her voice was professional, but with a hint of compassion. "Ma'am, we've searched the house and your daughter's computer. We've found searches, information about dosages, about symptoms, about plants and compounds." She paused. "And a diary." A diary. The place where Laura had poured out her darkness. "Can I?" My voice broke. "Can I know what it said?" The officer hesitated. "It's not advisable, ma'am. They're very painful topics. But there's a recurring entry. a phrase she repeated. I fell silent, holding my breath. She wrote, I just want her to rest and free myself from her shadow. The shadow of the woman who never loved me like she loved him. The line went silent. I didn't cry. The tears had been exhausted. The pain was too deep for that. It was a void, a final tear in the soul. She had always seen it as a competition, for her father's love, for my attention, and in her sick mind, poisoned by resentment, the only way to win was by eliminating the competitor. It wasn't true. I had loved her. I had loved her with all my soul. But in a different way. She was my rock, my strong daughter. And in my pain, I had leaned on her too much, without seeing that she was also breaking. I had turned her into my caregiver, and she had interpreted that role as a condemnation, not as an act of love. The guilt, then, mixed with the horror. I wasn't guilty of her choice, but I was of my blindness, of not having seen the pain that grew in silence beside me. Carlos arrived that same afternoon. He entered the hotel room with his face haggard from travel and anguish. Matias threw himself into his arms, and finally broke down crying with the deep and liberating cry of a child who finally feels safe. I remained on the sidelines, observing, feeling like an intruder in their reunion. He approached me afterward and hugged me, an uncomfortable hug, full of shared pain, but also of a new and strange distance. I'm so sorry, Elena. I can't even imagine it. Neither could I. The following days were a bureaucratic and legal procedure. Laura was admitted to a forensic psychiatric unit for evaluation. She wouldn't go to a common prison, at least not immediately. Her defense would argue mental alienation, severe depression, a personality disorder. Justice would decide. Carlos took Matias to live with him at some friend's house in the city. It was best for the child, to get him away from the scandal, from the pain, from the house haunted by memories. I remained in the hotel, then in a small rented apartment. I couldn't return to the house. I had sold it through an agent, with everything inside. I wanted nothing except one thing. During the clearance, I recovered a box of old photos, and in it I found one. Laura was about 5 years old. She was sitting on my knees, in the old green chair, and we were both laughing, really laughing, with bright eyes, open mouths. Happiness was tangible, even on the faded paper. That was the image I chose to remember. Not the broken woman on the bedroom floor, not the methodical poisoner, but the girl who laughed in her mother's arms. Because in the end, that was the real poison, not the heavy metal she mixed in my soup, but the resentment we both allowed to grow in silence, fed by unspoken words, by loves not expressed in the right way, by unshared pains. One afternoon, months later, I went to visit her. The room was white, quiet, impersonal. She was sitting by a window, looking at the garden. She seemed smaller, more fragile. Her gaze was absent, medicated. I sat beside her. She said nothing. Neither did I. After a long while, I extended my hand and left the photo on the table, in front of her. She looked down. Her eyes settled on the image, and for an instant, something broke in her expression of indifference, a flash of recognition, of pain. Her fingers, trembling, caressed the edge of the photo. There was no "I'm sorry." There was no "I forgive you." There was no happy ending. There was only silence, and a photo of two people who no longer existed, looking at each other from an irrecoverable past. I got up and left. Upon going outside, the afternoon sun was warm on my face. I breathed deeply. The air didn't taste of poison. It tasted of life, of a damaged life, irremediably changed, but life nonetheless. Sometimes, at night, I still dream about the soup, about the white powder, about her eyes. But then I look at the copy of that photo I keep on my nightstand, And I remember that love existed, that it was real, and that in some twisted and terrible way, even in the darkest act perhaps, just perhaps, a part of her believed she was acting out of love, a sick love, transformed into hatred by pain and incomprehension, but love nonetheless. The last spoon was that of forgiveness, not toward her, toward myself, for not having seen, for not having known, for having survived. And it was the most bitter of all, but also the most necessary, because in the end, the antidote wasn't in a counterpoison, but in accepting that shadow and light inhabit the same heart, and that sometimes the line that separates them is as thin as the edge of a knife.